Hey everybody, welcome back to another Tuesday's Tech Talk. Before I really get started today with today's episode, I want to throw a big congratulations out there to Ron Bernay at New Record Day. He's the guy who edits all these videos and puts them on his channel. He and his wife Sarah just added 2 new additions to their family this week. Sarah had twins this week, so their lives of course will never be the same, but I'm sure it'll be filled with lots of joy. Congratulations, Ron and Sarah. And now, this week's episode. This week's episode got me thinking because I've had quite a few calls recently. Of course, it has a lot to do with the Tuesday Tech Talk videos about designing crossovers for people, designing crossovers for individuals, and I've had some upstart companies contact me wanting me to help them with crossover development, and of course I love doing that work. For me, that's the most fun of all the stuff I do. I love doing crossover design work. I love the engineering, all aspects of it to me are a lot of fun. If I could just line speakers up here and do crossovers every day, that would be great. That's more fun than operating a business, that's for sure. But I've had a lot of guys asking me recently to design crossovers for stuff that they can't send to me. Let me reiterate, guys, in order for me to design a crossover, have to have the actual speaker here. I'm actually taking measured responses of that speaker to see what the output is in that box. You change the width of the baffle, the height of the baffle, you're changing the baffle step loss, you're changing the spacing between the drivers, all kinds of things. All that has to be taken into account to design a crossover. So I have to have it here. The other thing is, I've had a couple of guys asking me to design crossovers, and they're saying I've picked out this driver, I've picked out that driver. But maybe they haven't purchased drivers yet. They're just saying, this driver and this driver, can you design a crossover for this? Well, yeah, same thing still applies, have to have it here. But in some cases I'm looking at driver selection, and I'm seeing a metal cone driver that has a huge resonant bump in the impedance curve and a lot of breakup and right in that range. And that's something that as a designer I look at it and I say, I'm going to have to filter that out of it. So I'm going to have to keep it below that range so that ringing is not in the playback. So that means that particular woofer may have a range limited to about 1500 hertz. The tweeter they picked out, they were looking at, it was an AMT tweeter that would only play down to about 3000 hertz, so that they wouldn't even reach each other. For me to design crossovers for this stuff, the drivers have to be compatible. It's easier if you bring us in on the earlier design aspects than bringing us in on the tail end and trying to fix something. So today I thought, with all this indecision about what drivers to use and things like that, I would kind of go back to the beginning of GR Research and talk about what we did when we were designing drivers and how we selected the drivers that we used, and kind of that whole process versus some of these companies that say, I picked this woofer and I picked this tweeter, and we say, or I say, why? Well, they looked good. Well, they look good visually, but if you look at the parameters, they're not suitable for what you're doing. One of the speakers that I tested last week, the woofer, which was fairly expensive, was in a box volume that was twice the size it needed. The drivers were spaced too far apart. There was too much surface area around the drivers. Guys, if you're early in the stages, bring us in early and let us help you with the design elements and avoid some of the problems, and we'll get you further along. So when my partner and I got started in this, the first thing we did was we started ordering drivers from everybody. We ordered drivers from Dyne Audio, from Peerless, from VIFA to ScanSpeak, the Seaz drivers, Cabas, Focal, you name it. We ordered tons and tons of stuff and just started imagine things that we thought would work well together and listen to different things. And some of the things we noticed was that the more expensive drivers didn't necessarily sound better. And different materials really made a difference in how things sounded. One of the things that stood out when we first started was we got a sample sent to us from Peerless of India, who was at that time making drivers from Peerless of Denmark, and they had kind of recently broke off on their own, and they still carried the name Peerless. They sent us a sample that was similar to our M130 driver here, a little polymer chassis, paper cone. In the type of quantities we were considering, they weren't really expensive, but when we started playing with these things and listened to them, they sounded fantastic, better than most of the expensive drivers that we were using. And I thought, well, what's the difference here? Why is it so much better sounding than some of these more expensive drivers? Is it the polymer frames? Is it something they've done in the motor structure? Is it the materials being used? So we sent them different cones, and we had versions of it made out of a honeycomb Kevlar, a woven Kevlar. There was some, I think a polycone was used. There was some carbon fiber. And here I've laid out different cones for you to look at. Here's a carbon fiber cone. This is another carbon fiber. These two are some type of polypropylene. This one's a paper cone. It's a little heavy paper cone, but a paper cone. Bulletproof material, of course. You see that in the marketing of some of these companies. They all sounded different. All the different materials all had a different sound to them. And we compared the same driver, but with different cone materials. And then we wound up comparing the same driver with the cone material that we liked best, which sounded the best, which was paper, sounded by far the best, and it was the smoothest. And then we tried different dust caps. There was a little round dust cap, the shaped dust cap. There was a kind of an inverted dust cap, and we listened to those, we measured them, we compared them, and we did a lot of research and development. We really put a lot of time into that, and that's what actually led to the M130, which we sold thousands of these things. And we did an 8-ohm version, a 16-ohm version. This has been a really successful driver. This really helped kickstart our whole business early on. And we used some Focal products. We became a distributor for Focal drivers, Cabas, and all kinds of different parts and components. We stocked tons of that stuff, and we did our due diligence. We listened, we compared, and one of the things that really worked really well was the cone material and the shape of the cone made a nice smooth roll off. I mean, you can see the response rose smoothly off at the top. We weren't having to add tons of parts to correct anything. The impedance curve was smooth, no internal resonance, no ringing. It's a non-resonance frame. All those things really add up. A lot of little things add up to big things. Things to not look for. Compared to this driver, this was something we used early on in big line source we did. This is like a little mini subwoofer. As you see, it's got a huge motor structure on the back of it compared to the little M130. But this is lightweight moving mass. This is a heavy moving mass. So heavier moving mass, you need more motor to drag that thing around. But more motor doesn't necessarily mean mo better. Just because it's got a bigger magnet on the back of it doesn't mean it's a better driver. I know if you've come from the car audio world where bigger is better, you may have been brainwashed into thinking that a little bit. And on some of that stuff in car audio, what they'll do is they'll just hang a bigger and bigger magnet on the back of their woofer to create a field strength that's way too strong. And so to compensate, they'll just make the gap bigger around the voice coil. So they're reducing field strength by increasing the field strength there at the gap by just making the gap bigger. And so they're compensating for the larger motor structure. What they could do is just put a smaller motor structure on the back of it and put a normal gap around the voice coil and have the exact same field strength on the coil, but that doesn't sell. What sells is a great big honking magnet on the back of the speaker. So you see that a lot in car audio. Not quite so much in the high-end home audio and the high-end drivers, but you still see it. This driver here is a metal cone driver. This is a pretty good driver for a metal cone driver. It doesn't have a really harsh metallic sound or really artificial sound like a lot of the metal cone drivers do. And the motor structure, of course, looks huge, but a lot of that is because it is shielded. When you shield it, you'll add a bucking magnet, which is a second magnet that's flipped around so that when you cram it onto the back of the other magnet, you're canceling the stray fields. Then they put a shielding cup on the back of it, so it looks huge, but part of it is just huge because it's shielded. Here's another sample that I had sitting back here I thought I'd pull up. This is a little wave core driver. Wave core drivers are pretty nice drivers. I haven't really found any that had parameters that were in useful ranges that really motivated me to want to do something with. But they make nice drivers, paper cones, nice roll-offs, nice frames. You know, it's a metal frame. It's going to have a little ring to it, but pretty nice drivers, and they're not crazy expensive. You know, there's good drivers out there that you can find without spending tons and tons of money. Higher dollar amounts doesn't necessarily mean greater performance, so you have to separate price out of the equation. Don't look at something thinking because it's so expensive that it's got to be better. That is not a measuring stick when you're looking at drivers. You know, they're expensive for a reason. A lot of it is the small quantities that they're being produced in and the amount of markup that they could put on it, and that they're selling to a distributor, and that distributor's marking it up, and so on. There are things though that make drivers a little more expensive compared to a little M130. The NQ driver is a dual motor design. It's got a neodymium magnet on the pole piece. It's got a ceramic magnet on the top plate, big 44mm voice coil, copper shorting rings above and below the gap. This is an all-out effort. Polymer chassis, non-resonant, and a paper cone. Smooth response. We sell these for $109 a piece. They'll easily compete with and be compared against any of those $200 and $400 drivers. They're just not that expensive because of the amount of quantity that we have made at once. We have it brought over from India. It's inexpensive to have stuff shipped from India. They're a duty-free zone. The shipping in the container is inexpensive, and we have it sent to port of entry in Dallas-Fort Worth, which pays for the inbound shipping, you know, across the land to the port. So we save a lot of money in the way we're ordering it. The quality control with those guys has been fantastic. We've had great luck with them. So any of our drivers that you want to consider, a lot of time and engineering has gone into them. We've done everything we can to make them to where they're user-friendly. If you want to order one and use it in some other design, fantastic. If you want us to order a completed kit that we've done all the homework in, you know, for and we just hand you everything and all you have to do is put together, you're way ahead. You're way ahead versus designing something on your own. But understand, a lot of you guys, the fun for you is designing something on your own. So what do you really look for? There's a couple of things when you're looking at your woofers and your small drivers that you want to look for. One, of course, look for a smooth frequency response. Look for a smooth frequency response that is above the range that you're going to use it in. If you've got a metal cone driver of some kind and you think, well, it's good within that range, but at the top there's all this breakup and ringing. Keep in mind you're going to have to put a lot of crossover parts on that to get that out of it. You're going to have to pull that down in output, or you're going to hear all that ringing. You can't just put a second order or even third order sometimes filter on it, because the ringing is still going to be there. So look at the frequency response. The other thing, look at the impedance curves on drivers. When you see an impedance curve and you look at the bottom of its range, you'll see a rise at its FS, right at the middle, that's its free air resonance, and it'll come back down. Watch that range as it settles and starts to rise. If you see little bumps in the impedance curve, and in some cases you can see a lot of bumps. I had a company, or a guy in Las Vegas, send us some of the really expensive full range drivers. They were 8-inch drivers, papaya based cone material, huge neodymium motor structure on it, super high sensitivity, really expensive. And if you look at the impedance curve, there are jaggedy bumps all across it that are indicative of internal resonances. So when I measure the frequency response, you can see peaks and dips all in the response. It was really rough. Then you look at the spectral decay and you see stored energy at every one of those peaks. All those resonances, stored energy, lots of ringing. Guys, when you see that, no matter how expensive the driver is, that's a red flag. All that stuff's a red flag. Look at that impedance curve. Any little resonance peak you see there, like even if it's a small peak, then look up into the frequency response and you may see a corresponding dip or a little peak there. And if possible, if they have spectral decays, which usually they don't provide spectral decays, you can see exactly what's going on in the spectral decay. When you see that, you know that you're going to have to cross that over a full octave or more below that range to get that out of it, or you're going to hear that ringing and that resonance. It's going to be there in the response. So when you're looking at drivers, look for those things. Look at the impedance curve. Look at the frequency response. Think about how many parts you're going to have to put on there to correct it, and if it's smooth enough to stay within the band that you're trying to use it in. If you're trying to reach a tweeter with one of these smaller drivers that you're looking at, will it play up into that range without problems and cross into that tweeter? Same thing with the tweeter. Is its frequency range low enough that it'll reach the driver that you're trying to cross it to? In general, stiff cones, metal cones, more problematic in those ranges. They're going to have more ringing, more breakup. You're going to have to add more parts on there to correct them. If you're starting out and you're doing this and you've never really done loudspeaker design before, you're a rookie at it, look at paper cone based drivers. They're going to be free of a lot of those problems. They're going to be a lot easier for you to design crossovers and filters for. And again, if you're going at this, first timer, and you're trying to figure out how I'm going to design a crossover for this, I'm going to tell you right now, if you don't have the tools to do it with, it's going to be tough. You need to have a measurement system where you can do a gated time window. That means you're looking at a little sliver in time of the frequency response of that driver without room reflections. In other words, you got the microphone set up in front of it, you got the speaker set up, you send it a pulse, and you say, okay, I want to start right when the pulse reaches the speaker, right when that impulse response is there, and then for 4 milliseconds I want to look at the frequency response, and then I want to put a stop, and I want to gate out all the floor reflections, the ceiling reflections, everything in the room that's going on. You want to gate that out so you can just see the frequency response of that driver. If you're taking a room measurement and you're getting all the room reflections in there, man, forget it. You can't see what's going on with those drivers. You have got to do some type of gated time window, and then you need the parts like we keep stocked here to drop on there and see what it's doing. Take another measurement, check your impedance curve, see if that's not becoming a problem. Look at the spectral decay. It's a back and forth. You have to have the right tools to do it. If you're still thinking you're going to just tell some company the driver specs and they're just going to spit out a crossover for you using some type of software, you're going to be lucky if it gets in the ballpark. That's why companies and individuals send their stuff to us, because we actually do a measured response curve. We actually design it based on the acoustic output of the drivers. That's the only way to do it and get the highest level of performance. Why spend $400, $500, $800, thousands of dollars on drivers if you're not going to design the crossover properly? I mean, you're just not going to get there if you're not going to do it right. The whole heart of the speaker and how it sounds is all based on the crossover design. That's as important as anything, as all the drivers. The crossover is the heart of it. That's what's controlling the drivers. That's what's separating everything. That's what's creating that linear frequency response that you want. You don't want a frequency response that's rough, it's peaked, it's high on one end and low on the other, and it's got stored energy. That's not what you're looking for. So do your due diligence. If you have questions, if you want me to look at stuff, I do that. I do that all the time. I get 30, 40 emails a day sometimes, people asking us to look at that stuff. I'll look at it for you. Don't send me a book and tell me your whole history of what you've done and why you've gotten to where you are. Just send me your question. Have me look at something. I'll look at it. I'll help you in any way that I can. I may ask you to send it to me at some point when you get ready to design a crossover. I can help you easily that way. We do offer free measuring and testing services. I want to reiterate that. You send it to me, I'll measure and test it for you, and I'll give you advice. That's just part of what we do, and I enjoy doing it. So that's it for today. I hope this was helpful. I hope it helps get you guys kind of pointed in a good direction. And again, throw your comments down below. And thanks for watching. See you guys next time.